I think my 15 minutes is up.
Your 15 minutes that was a year ago.
Yeah. It's great to be here. For a lot of reasons. My daughter actually teaches here at Denny, and it's my first time to be in the new building, so it's really exciting. And to use their fancy new screen. But seriously, I do a lot of international travel, and everywhere I go, absolutely everywhere, I tell the story of Galleria. I talk about everything from the bottom-up planning and how it resulted in unique solutions like having a library with affordable housing up above it, something that would never come out of the bureaucracy. It comes out of the community. The Youngstown Cultural Center, the whole project around Longfell Creek and the trail and the gardens, and it's a really inspiring story that I share absolutely everywhere I go. I've shared it in Beijing, I've shared it in Tokyo, I shared it in Sydney, Australia, in Delhi, in India. People are talking about Galleria, and it inspires people about what they can do in their own community. So I want to thank you for not only the incredible work you do here in this community, but how you've really been an inspiration to people all over and spurred people on in other places to do similar work. So it's a real privilege to be here. So I'm always telling the story of Diers when I'm in other places, so I thought I'd better tell a different story here, because you know that story better than I do. So I've got a few quick stories from other places, and I just thought I'd use it to illustrate some key points I wanted to make, which is how do we get even more people engaged in our community work? So I'm going to go through that really fast, and then I'm going to talk a little bit about the role of government in helping to support this kind of work. So I've got what I call several keys to developing broad, inclusive engagement. Again, I apologize. The light's great, but you can't see anything. So I've lots of keys for how to get more people engaged. And I think there's a huge problem with breakdown of community these days. Robert Putnam wrote a book called Bowling Alone, talked about how fewer and fewer people are engaged in community life. He says the biggest thing breaking down community is television. He wrote this book 10 years ago. He said people have time for television, but they say they don't have time for community, right? He wrote this book 10 years ago. I think now you would add video games and Facebook. I was just at a conference where they said young people are spending an average of 10 to 12 hours a day in front of screens of all types. Right? And social media can be a great thing to kind of reinforce personal connections, but it can't be a substitute. So I keep thinking that television is our biggest competition with community life, and we're losing. We're doing something terribly wrong. And I think the problem is we have forgotten how to have fun. It shouldn't be that hard to make community more engaging, more satisfying, but we've made it such a drudgery. I have a friend who says the hardest thing about getting people involved in community is those GD activists. And I said, what do you mean GD? And he said, the grim and determined. Yeah, describes so many that they're like self-proclaimed community leaders I know. They just like to complain all the time. We're never happy unless they have something to complain about. And some people gravitate to that, and most people don't. Most people go with the sense like we can make change. And that's the kind of leaders we have here in Diers. People who want to make change, who have a sense of hope, who are proud of their community, want to make it even better. I have another friend who says, "Why have a meeting when you can have a party?" Think about it. The purpose is who can endure the most suffering, right? The purpose is to build relationships, to build community. You can't do that a lot better through parties and fun than you can through meetings. So the first key point I want to make is have fun. And I have a story to illustrate that. I wish these pictures were better. But this is from Surrey. Do you know Surrey, right outside of Vancouver? Right? And they have a SkyTrain station right there in the Wally Business District, right in the center of Surrey. And they put a bench there so people could wait for the SkyTrain. Well, some of the wrong people were hanging out on this bench. There were some problems with drug dealing, and so they did what's happening in so many places. Many places have removed the bench. In Surrey, they simply erected a fence around the bench, which is the stupidest solution in the world. And I think it's what's happening. We need bumping places. We need gathering places to build community. And if we're just putting curfews on our parks, if we're just taking away the benches, it removes those gathering places. So in the business district, they started up a campaign. And their campaign, well, look at this poor guy. This guy needs, you can't see it very well, but he needs a bench. He can't even get in, right? So they start up a campaign, and their campaign is called Free the Bench! and they put this bench on trial at their local street fair. So they have hundreds of people come to the street fair, and they have a stage, And on the stage, the local elected official served as a magistrate. And here's one of the business people testifying. He says, I've known that bench all my life. And it's a good bench. And they had one character witness after another talking about the good character of that bench. And finally, people voted unanimously, hundreds of people as a jury, free the bench. But the city still didn't free the bench. So here's the bench. I wish that was a better picture. So they had fun with it. They just tried to make fun of the city, and make a little bit of ridicule. They said, well, this bench, as long as it's in jail, it should have some company. So they brought in all these chairs to accompany the bench. And then they fixed up some mannequins and brought them in, so there were like people hanging out on the bench, playing chess on the bench. And then they fixed it up kind of like a park, put sod in, birdhouse. Then they fixed it up like a living room. And they actually had a television set here. And then they dressed it up and they called it Benchosaurus. And then they started folding origami cranes. It just had all these cranes in there. And then they put up a sign that teach people how to make origami cranes. And they had a bucket so people could leave them. And they got this huge collection of cranes. And they had cranes everywhere. At Christmas time, they fixed it up with Christmas tree and lights and everything. And finally, it drew so much attention, and everybody got behind this, that the city finally agreed to free the bench. So they put the sign up, and the city opened it up and sponsored a big bench painting party. And the whole community came out, painted the bench, and put signs of love to the bench on there. But it was just a fantastic thing to build community. It wasn't, there were no meetings. They made change. They made their point. They brought people together. They had fun. That's how you build community. So, second lesson I learned about building community is to start where people are. This is right out of Saul Winsky's work. And I don't have time to go through this, but the closer you involve people to where they live, the more likely they are to get involved. So having block organizations is absolutely critical, but we need to make them more than block watch. Block action groups where people are actually supporting the at-risk kids on their block, the plastic kids, or supporting the housebound seniors, or having policy discussions that feed up to a really broad-based neighborhood association. Or in the block I used to live on, we did a neighborhood manifesto, a block Mead Street manifesto. And we wrote up all the values by which we're going to support each other and support the earth, and we all signed it. Or we showed movies on the side of somebody's house at night. All kinds of things. You can do skills exchanges. You can do bulk buying. All kinds of stuff. And the more kinds of things you do, and do emergency preparedness. The more kinds of things you do at the block level, the safer you're going to be. If you don't focus on safety, you focus on community. You focus on bringing people together. Focus on what's important to people. Focusing on people's language and culture. Their passions, not what you're passionate about, but what they care about. That's what gets them engaged. So asking questions rather than just preaching to people. And then finally, the one I want to emphasize is focusing on their networks. Too oftentimes we say, boy, we're working so hard, why don't more people join our neighborhood association? And why are people so apathetic? Just about everybody's already organized. They just don't belong to our neighborhood association. They're active in their church. They're active in the food bank. Pete's active in everything. They belong to sports associations. They belong to book clubs. They belong to block watches. They belong to emergency preparedness groups. And if we can reach out to all the different faith-based groups, we can reach out to those, we can really get broad participation. If we start looking at how do we align ourselves and work together as one community. So this is an example from Wodonga, Australia, that borrowed our Neighborhood Matching Fund program from Seattle. And there was a neighborhood association. There were some members who wanted to start a community garden. So they saw the church, and the church had this large grassy area. They said, can we use some of your yard for a garden? The church said, fine. They said, but we need to build raised beds. How are we going to get that done? Well, in Australia, they got these things called men's sheds in every town in Australia, where the retired men come together, and they get together in a shed, and they've got all this woodworking equipment, and they make wooden toys for the kids, they renovate facilities for the community, do all these community projects. It's a fantastic strategy. It's a great for men's mental health, to socialize with other men, to talk about their personal problems. It's a great excuse to get away from their wives for a little while, to do some drinking together. But they also use it as a way to mentor young men who are in trouble. And so they teach them how to do woodworking in the process, help bring them back into the community. So anyhow, they involved the men's shed. This is the Wodonga men's shed. Here's the guy showing off all his equipment. But they built these raised beds, and the whole community got engaged because they reached out to all the different networks. So here's a young person from elementary school who got involved. They reached out to the new Mutual Assistance Association for Immigrants and Refugees who come to Wodonga. They got involved. The senior center was a block away, and they got involved. Here's a guy in a wheelchair watering the plants. And the crops started growing, and they recognized that there was a commercial kitchen in this church. So they said, can we use that? And they started picking this food, and they went to the local community college, and they got a nutritionist there to volunteer her time to prepare gourmet meals, recipes. And the whole community came together to pick this produce and then create gourmet meals. But here you can see that the high school students got involved from the local high school. A couple blocks away is an institution for people with intellectual disabilities. They are the key chefs now in this community kitchen. Really proud that they're cooking meals for the community. Really proud. And here they are preparing the meals, and then they freeze them, and they serve thousands and thousands of the most gourmet, nutritious meals to other people who would otherwise have no food at all. And they do it because they brought all of them together. It wasn't one group that could do it all. Building on the strengths of every different group, particularly the people who were left out. So the third key to broad-based engagement is don't sit on your assets. Okay? And the point here is that every individual in every community, everybody, without exception, everybody has incredible gifts to give to our community. I like to think about it as three kinds of gifts. One are gifts of the head, their unique knowledge, gifts of the heart, their passions, and gifts of the hands, their skills. The problem in our society is increasingly we're putting labels on huge sections of our community that labels them not by their gifts, but by what they're missing. So most people in our community now have labels like homeless, unemployed, poor person, non-English speaking, single parent, addict, offender, disabled, old person, at-risk youth. And when we put those labels and just identify people by what they're missing, they become clients in a service system. And when we focus on people's gifts, they become citizens in our community. And I'm not dismissing that everybody in this room has needs. Everybody in this room requires some services, but somehow in our society we create two classes of people. The class of people with the gifts and the class of people with the needs. And then we wonder why none of those people are engaged in our community. Because we're just focusing on what they're missing rather than what they have to contribute. So here's a quick story from Limerick, Ireland. Limerick already didn't have a great reputation, but there are 4 social housing communities there that were having a real problem, huge gang problems in these 4 social housing communities. One of them is called Ballinacora Weston. These are some of the gang members. There have been several murders in this housing development, and the government solution was we're going to buy up people's homes and we're going to tear them down and rebuild. So they started buying them up without consulting the residents. One at a time they started buying them up, and they became boarded up, covered with graffiti, garbage absolutely everywhere. And with the collapse of the economy in Ireland, there's been no money to follow through on the plan. So now about half the housing is boarded up. People are worse off than ever. People totally afraid to come out of their homes, living behind locked doors. And you can't build a community behind locked doors. But there was an at-risk girl, at-risk youth, a young woman named May, 14 years old, who organized her friends, and on Christmas Eve went around house to house Christmas caroling. Incredible bravery. But that leadership by the young people who've been seen as the problem gave everybody else the confidence to come out of their homes. And then the young people organized, and there was the big lot where the drug dealing was happening that was overgrown, covered with trash. They went and cleaned it up. They painted out all the graffiti. They cleaned up the sidewalks and the streets. They recruited their parents to help them build planter boxes and planted those. Created this wonderful mural. And they turned that problem property into what they call the Garden of Hope. And it gave everybody the confidence of hope again, sense that their community could be a different place. And now the residents are going through against the wishes of the government and renovating the houses and starting to live in them again. rebuilding their sense of community. But it was the young people who took the lead. So if we can lift those labels off and focus on the gifts that young people and everybody can give to our community and find ways to involve them other than making them come to meetings, we can really build a strong, even better community. So I just want to wrap up by talking about the role of government in all this. What I'm amazed at is I think everywhere I go, people are rediscovering the value of democracy. The governments are starting to realize we've got to be working a different way. That there are fewer and fewer resources for government, budget cuts, and that a lot of the resources, the real resources, in our community. But in order to do that, people in the community need to start thinking of themselves as citizens rather than as taxpayers. Every form of government's got taxpayers. Only democracies have citizens. So we need to start thinking about how do we get people to think as citizens again. And frankly, the leaders in this movement are Brazil, which is doing participatory budgeting all over Brazil, building up budgets at the neighborhood level, massive development of budgets. It's a model that's now being replicated in London. New York City's experimenting with it, but Brazil's leading the way. And the other place where democracy is really alive is India, where they have village assemblies. The whole village comes together to help make decisions. We're falling way behind. In Taiwan, I got to speak at the graduation ceremony for hundreds of young people who are graduating as young community planners. Leaders, volunteer leaders in their communities doing projects who've been going through this training so that they can help their community. There's community empowerment centers in every city in Taiwan. In Australia, I've done a lot of work over there over the years. I was in Golden Plains. It's a rural community that was amalgamated where 20 different communities were amalgamated into one. Very rural. The farmers were picketing City Hall because there weren't any services. And their council said, we're going to do bottom-up planning because we don't have any money. And so they empowered every community to step up and develop their own plan. And because a quarter of the town, 4,000 people, 16,000 people got involved in the planning process. 98% of the recommendations got implemented because they were implemented by the community themselves because they had ownership. They were citizens. They weren't taxpayers. And now that town, Golden Plains, has the highest approval rate of any municipality in the state of Victoria. Matching grant programs based on what we started in Seattle are being replicated absolutely all over the world. They've got matching grant programs in Norway, Japan, Portugal, South Africa, and the project I showed you in Ireland has got matching funds all over the place. This is in Newcastle in Australia, and they had a little pocket park that wasn't being kept up by the local council, so neighbors came in and said, we're going to re-landscape that with native plants. This is just 1 year later. And they put a picnic table there so to bring people together, create a sense of community. They have community events there. And here you can see 1 year later, the kangaroo claws are growing up. But what's great is the unexpected results of these projects. It started bringing back wildlife into this place. I wish you could see this picture. These are tawny broadmouths, the weirdest looking birds. And their mouths open wide open and they swallow whole possums, so they take care of the whole possum problem in the neighborhood. They're just amazing. But just the unintended consequences, bringing nature back to the city. But what I really love is the way it builds community. So this guy in the center is a Vietnam War vet. He had huge mental health issues. He was totally isolated in his neighborhood. But he got excited about this project. And he got involved, and now he's the leader on this project. And everybody in the community looks up to him. And he led the tour and talked about how proud he is of it. So what I love about this stuff isn't so much the context, it's the way it builds community in a way meetings never could, right? And finally, doing a lot of work in the UK now. And here I am at number 10. Gave a couple talks there. But they're replicating our Neighborhood Network Fund program across the country with £120 million because they don't have money. And they're doing bottom-up planning because they don't have money. And they're training 5,000 community organizers because they don't have money. Here in Seattle, meanwhile, the biggest cuts have been to these neighborhood programs over the years, over the last 10 years. Every year, the biggest cuts have been in the Department of Neighborhoods. The matching funds less than half of what it used to be. We've got half the number of neighborhood service centers that we used to have. We no longer do bottom-up planning. We're back to top-down planning. It's not like we aren't spending money on planning. We're just doing it a different way. So it's really interesting, the different responses to the economic crisis. Some places are saying, hey, we don't have money. We've got to figure out a new way of doing our work, and our real power is in the community. And other places are saying, well, this stuff is just kind of fluff, and now we've got to get back to basics. And basics are things like buying the, those wooden parts that those new helicopters. Right? So those are the basics, right? And somehow we've forgotten that community, democracy is the ultimate basic for government. What could be a more important function of government than helping to rebuild our democracy? Nothing. Nothing's more basic. And the kind of resources we can tap when we get people to think of themselves as citizens again, as communities, rather than seeing government as sort of this foreign body. We've been really lucky in Seattle over the years where people really do identify with their government. They vote to increase taxes for affordable housing, for schools, and we can't take that for granted. We need to get back. The real strength of Seattle is our strong neighborhoods, unique neighborhoods, people like you who are making a difference. That's what makes Seattle such a great city. And everywhere I go, they say, how can we be like Seattle? So we got to work hard, get more budget cuts the next few months. So please fight and help Seattle be Seattle.